Thanks very much, everybody. It's a real pleasure to meet Nora today and to be here to chat to you all. Nora, I guess I've heard that you decided aged really early on, about 11, that you wanted to be an astronaut. Tell us, was there a moment at that point where it happened, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so it's a privilege to be here, actually, in my hometown in Ballina. My dad is an Achill man, my mother's Belmullet, so I don't think you get much more Mayo than that. So it's great to have Ireland's Edge here and to be part of it. So I suppose I go back when I was 11. I was just finished 5th class in the Key National School in Ballina, and we went on a family holiday to Cleveland. And I guess, as some of the speakers mentioned earlier, this whole idea of diaspora and having relations and from families who had moved abroad. My mother's sister was living in Cleveland. My father's family, there's a huge family of Pattons in Cleveland. And I probably have more cousins in Cleveland, actually, than I do in Ireland, which is interesting. But it was one of those things, I'm the youngest of 5 children in the house, and we went on this family trip to NASA, to Cleveland, and on that we went to see NASA, and I just took a huge interest in aviation and space and rockets and astronauts from that trip. So it was really that moment then that I kind of thought, there's something so much bigger than what I see in Ballina growing up, and I want to know more about the world, and I want to know much more about space and astronauts, and how they get there and live there.
It's really lovely to hear that rather than think of the diaspora as people who come back to Ireland, that you went to visit your relations, and that then this sparked off really what was to become so far a lifetime pursuit for you. Was it your idea to go to NASA, or did someone else? Was it you?
Someone else. So it was just one of those things, we were doing all of the typical tourist sites, going to the baseball and the basketball or whatever sporting events we're on. And I can actually still remember being 11 and standing outside NASA in, that summer, and seeing the meatball, the NASA, the logo on the outside of the building. So, it was just one of those random things that we went, and I took the interest. The other kids at the time didn't. So I often say that's why it's so important to expose young children and children of all ages to lots of different things, because you never know what thing they will attach
will
to.
Spark their interest. So then you came home, and from that moment on, were you planning to become an astronaut? What did you do? How did you make that happen?
I suppose the seed was planted at that stage in terms of space, and that's kind of what my interest was. But I often think, I got to go back to NASA a few times during my teenage years, and I think that was really important, because often you can develop an interest of something as a young child and then maybe lose it as you're going through your teenage years. But I was listening to a TED talk just this week. Simon Sinek, he's motivational speaker and that, and I thought it was really interesting. He said there's 2 ways that people can view the world. There is the people who see what they want, and there are the people who see the things that get in the way of getting them what they want. And I think I recognized from an early age I was one of those people who saw what I wanted, because I can remember being 15 and being in Florida, and NASA is obviously Kennedy Space Center is in Florida, and I basically said to my parents, who are here today, I said, if you don't take me to NASA, I'm going to get on the bus and go by myself. So my mother said to my father, Pat, you better take her, because she will actually get in the bus.
And then in Limerick, it was aeronautical engineering. Was that, to me, I guess I did astro, but that's not the way you get to be an astronaut, is it? Aeronautical engineering.
There's lots of different ways, lots of different routes, I suppose, to actually get into space. And I think it's important. Like Chris Hadfield, very famous astronaut, he often says when he decided as a child to become an astronaut, it was impossible in Canada, and it was the exact same for me. As a young child in Mayo in Ballina, but going to Kennedy Space Center at 15, I got to see the Saturn V rocket, which is the one that went to the moon, stacked in the visitor complex, and I just thought, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm going to do. So I started to do a bit of looking in terms of what I could study to kind of progress that career, and aeronautical engineering was my choice of career from that point.
And then a PhD after that. And what was your topic there?
So it was wind tunnel testing. So I spent 4 years after the aeronautical. It was all aeronautics over those years. So
still thinking I'm going to get the space out of this.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I saw a graph recently. It was quite realistic in terms of life, and there was, idealistic life. You have, start point here, my goal here, and a line in the middle. When does that ever happen? It doesn't. And then the other graph was like line here, squiggle, blah, and then the end point. So I often say it's a case of space has always been my thing. It's only really in more recent years that I see an opportunity to actually get there. I had always had that ambition, not necessarily knowing how I would make that happen, but it's only in more recent years that the actual opportunities of getting to space seem much more likely than they would have 20 years ago.
And that's with Project Possum.
That's right.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so like I did my undergrad and PhD in UL, always on the lookout for space-related courses, programs, whatever it was, and then I went to study at the International Space University in 2010.
What is that?
My niece said, "Is that real?"
It's not
real. It's not. Their headquarters are in Strasbourg in France, and they have a 9-week summer program that moves around every year. Very intensive summer program. You learn like lots of different things about space, so space law, engineering, humanities, business, many different elements, lots of core lectures, team projects, different things like that. And I suppose for me, I've always appreciated the importance of me being part of a community. That's kind of where I feel a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose, which is really important for me. People often talk about passion, but I think it's actually purpose is what drives me more than passion. And then I think in doing something purposeful, you evoke that passion as an emotion. But I had got the opportunity to apply for POSSUM. So it's polar suborbital science in the upper mesosphere. Mouthful, I know, but they're very interested in the research in our upper atmosphere, and the new suborbital space flights are perfect actually for doing types of measurements on upper atmospheric clouds.
And can you tell us a bit about the science of that? Why do we need to, what is that research and why do we need it?
Yeah, so I suppose like even when you think about going to space, you can use certain types of environments on Earth to practice and simulate different situations. Our upper atmosphere, we don't know a whole lot about it in terms of getting real-time in situ measurements. So that's why the suborbital space flights are actually a great opportunity, because you can fly through these noctilucent clouds and take in-flight measurements. But also it can give us a sense of other planets if we understand our own. When we use telescopes to look at far-off planets, their atmospheres, their makeup, if we can understand our own planet in more detail, we can use those results that we get and research that we have to kind of understand what's going on other planets better.
And do we need to know that because we might go there? I'm just thinking about space tourism and whether it's likely that we might tend to need to go there.
I think it's knowledge. I think we're constantly looking to advance our knowledge in lots of different things. I think people aren't even aware, even with the International Space Station up there at the moment, astronauts live and work and constantly on it for almost 20 years now. And the amount of research that they're doing constantly, like every single day, they're looking at pharmaceuticals, drug discovery, materials, fire, because things behave completely differently up there. So even fire and flames is a really interesting one. Here on Earth you get that flame shape because you get the hot air and the motion of gravity and what it's doing to that flame. But in space they're little balls of fire because there is no up or down. without the gravity we have here on Earth. So I think it's incredibly important and I think that's where, technology and the interaction of astronauts now in terms of what they're doing every day is so important, because you're now getting, real time, here's what we're working on, DNA, all of these amazing things and how it can impact life on Earth. So it's not that they're doing it just for the sake of doing it. I think there's real and practical implications of where it can be put into place for the benefit of people on Earth.
And can you tell us a bit about the preparation you've done for your impossible space flight?
Yes, so with Possum, it's very hands-on, which I love, and there's a great community of people there. There's a lovely bunch of people, very supportive. They're people who see what they want. So I suppose I had recognised I've done a lot of the academic side for many years, and then this opportunity to go to Possum came up last year, and I jumped at it. I know a couple of colleagues of mine at ISU, Space University, had gone, and they highly recommended it. So we've done like high G flights.
They'd gone on the flight?
They had gone on this program. There was 2 colleagues of mine, and they said, go for it, you'll love it, So last October we were in Florida. We've done high G flights. So that's like to simulate the G forces that you would experience on an actual rocket launch. They work with a commercial company who's making a spacesuit for inside the vehicle. It's an IVA spacesuit. And you wear that inside the vehicle.
IVA means?
It's a spacesuit, intravehicular activity spacesuit. So it's for inside, but you also have a different one for outside the vehicle. Because obviously if you're in space, you need a lot more protection compared to inside the vehicle. But what's really cool is that as Possum candidates, we get to test that suit out. So we get to actually wear this spacesuit, put it on, pull down the visor, pressurize it up. So it gives you a real sense of how difficult it is, I suppose, to work in these things when they're actually pressurized, and combine that with the high G flights, you get a real sense of what it would be like to be in that. We've also done hypoxia training, so where your body is starved of oxygen. For slow onset hypoxia particularly is dangerous, because often on aircraft, if it's a sudden loss of pressure, it's obviously very noticeable. But the slow onset hypoxia, where you might have a small leak, it's much more dangerous, because you can reach a stage where you're not even functioning to put on your mask. So it's to be aware of what symptoms you have.
And any fear? I mean, you've just described a lot of things I'd be frightened of. I just wonder, are you going to say you're frightened of spiders, or is there anything you are frightened of, or how did you feel with going through that training? Or
I get asked that all the time.
What's your relationship with risk?
I just
wonder.
Okay. So I'm not fearless. People often say, am I motivated by fear, or am I fearless? I don't view it that way at all. I often think it's like every single person has like a limit of fear, but it's a case of doing test and training to kind of push that out a small bit more. So even in terms of before I went on the first Possum program, we have to have done scuba training. It's a prerequisite. So that in itself was great training before putting on the spacesuit, because they're quite claustrophobic once you put them on. But in having done the scuba diving, it's not as bad. So it's kind of this progression. But we did in April, we did what's called the Dunker. It's aviation egress. So how do you get out of something? Training in
water.
Yes, in a 15-foot pool. But that I had totally recognised. I said to the trainers before getting in, I was like, look, I'm feeling really nervous about getting in here. Basically, you're 5-point harness, you're strapped into a chair, and it's to simulate a helicopter crash landing in water. So you get into this thing and they raise it above the water, like 14, 15-foot pool, and then over the loudspeakers it says, ditching, 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 and then the next thing you're submerged down. Breath hold of air, so you have to like take a breath, and then you're like submerged down, flipped over, and you have to basically get out of this thing. So quick release. Well, you find your exit first, because that's the thing. It's your senses are all totally taken away from you in that situation, which is actually really interesting to experience. As you know, as nervous as I was getting in, it was a really interesting experience to know how you can visualize something in your mind without actually seeing it.
This is one of the things I was thinking of. I'm an experimental musician and I work sometimes in improvisation. And one of the things I was thinking about in relation to talking to you was there are some projects ongoing at the minute, one in particular called Translating Improvisation, where the things that we've learned from musical improvisation can be applied to other areas such as law or surgery. And so as musical improvisers, it's not life or death, but in these other situations, although there are very structured plans, we often do have to improvise, and maybe that's kind of what you're describing with the senses being taken away and having to improvise in that way, or is it all following protocol?
Well, I suppose it's following a procedure, because if you take off your harness without finding your exit, you're going to float. You won't have any sense of where you are. So if you don't find that exit and hold on for dear life, and that actually happened to one of the guys, and they had to pull him out the back. So it's all done in a very controlled, safe environment. But
so would you say there's no improvisation, no creativity, any kind of, are they those things you think about in any part of your work or training, or is it all very regimented?
I think it's probably a combination of both. In that, realistically, if you didn't find that exit first, you're going to float off and you're not going to know where you are. So there's certain like practicalities, but then it's like we did this egress, like how do you get out? They had a mock-up of the Orion space capsule, and we wore the suit in it, and we were having to get out, and it was the first time that we had done it. So I suppose it's a case of we had to kind of give feedback on the procedures. So if there was something that we had noticed that was not working in terms of where it came into that procedure list, we'd have to give feedback on that. So I think maybe a combination of both, but there's definitely some practical things that you
need to do.
have to put into place, yeah.
I'm just looking at the time. The other thing I was thinking about before I met you was about sound. I work a lot in sound, and I wondered what the sound of space is, or even if there is no sound in space, we still hear and we still listen. And I wondered what you'd be listening to, and then I thought it was communications, and I wonder, could you give us an idea of what those communications are like, and also if this has changed your relationship with communication, this kind of work?
That's really interesting. In terms of communications, I suppose a funny story. When I had the spacesuit on, they have it hooked up to like air to get air flown around, because it gets quite warm in there. So you also have the comms on. You have like your little microphone for talking to the guys outside, and then so I got used to all this like noise inside in the suit, and you have to like pop the glove. Then once you depressurize it, pop the glove, and then pop the visor, and I literally started shouting at the guy because I was used to all the noise in the suit. So I was like, geez, you wouldn't want to be claustrophobic inside in that suit. So in terms of communication, it's quite funny how you adapt to your environment. Noisy environment, shouting, But I actually took sign language classes recently. I've wanted to do that for ages. But this is something I've proposed, actually. There's a couple of different more missions that I'm working on. But as in, sign language isn't even universal. Irish sign language is different from American sign language. And I've often thought, as we go out and we explore further,
we should maybe make a universal one.
A universal space language, I think, would be quite a good thing to think about evolving, because we don't all want to be speaking one spoken language that we do on Earth, or
and will this be a visual language of some kind?
And visual, I think,
and presumably not with hands if you've got gloves on.
I think that's where we'd need to become a bit more innovative. But I think we could take lessons learned from the likes of scuba diving. That you have certain things that work in these different environments. But it's an interesting one.
So at the minute, all communication is done via voice.
They would communicate through the headsets. Yeah.
Great. Have we time to keep? Great. Can I ask you a wee bit about the difference in space travel from the stories I would have read about it? It was a very nationalistic thing. It was about exploration, and now we're thinking about it more commercially. So there are companies investing in this. What do you know of that, or what is your experience of that?
I think it's it's probably at one of the most exciting times it's been at, because it's moved out from government-only launchers. And I think, I recognised that a few years ago. I thought commercial space flight is going to be my route to getting there. And that's why Possum is such a good fit, because it's commercially based. But it's really interesting. I often say it's like a flower that's just about to open, because you've got SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, Boeing. You've got all these commercial players. Some of them are working with NASA to develop launchers to bring their astronauts to the ISS and further afield. So I think, that in itself has opened up competition. So it's driven prices and, innovation. All of those things are important, I think, as we move off. Especially in low Earth orbit, so that's like where the space station is. I think in going to the likes of Mars and further afield, we'll need like very much an international collaboration to make that happen, because, people often say, I'm going to go to Mars in 2020. It's like, there's a lot of work involved, as like the radiation, all of these different types of things. There's a lot of time and effort that needs to be spent to get missions like that human ready. So
what are the challenges that you see in the fact that it is being driven by commercial companies now? Are there any negative things about that rather than it being from governments?
Well, it's still regulated, I suppose. So they're not completely cut off. So we'll say like the companies that are working in partnership with NASA, like it's still very regulated in terms of the milestones that they need to reach before humans are going to be sent on these. So, and what's really cool is that they have like astronauts who've flown already as part of their, test flight astronauts, which is great, because I think it's that collaboration that's really pushing things along.
And do you know anything about robotics and AI, given that they are really quite far advanced at this point? Do we still need people to go into space?
Yeah, I suppose you often get asked that in terms of where this mix of robots and humans fit. I think, robots, if we look at Mars, the only planet inhabited just by rovers and, pieces of metal. But in terms of what we're getting from the rovers and all of that, it's amazing. Like you're getting landscapes and footage and videos and all that. But I think in sending humans there, you're bringing back a totally different perspective. They can interact with things and in ways that rovers can't. So I think it is, again, this collaboration between both that's going to be unique. Even going to Mars, if we sent humans to orbit Mars and, real-time interaction with the rovers, there's a lot that can be done there. So I think, we're humans, we want to go and explore and go and see new things and learn new things. So I think it has to be this combination of both.
Great. And what advice would you give anyone wanting to do what you've done?
I honestly think it's like there's so much opportunity available to people now. It's a case of setting off on your own course, and like I remember being 15 and writing that letter. I wrote a letter to NASA, and I actually was looking in my wardrobe at home last weekend and I saw the reply, like 1998 stamp date on it. So I'm showing my age. Yes, I'm in my mid-30s now, but there are ways and means, I think, if you're willing to seek them out. Try and be one of those people who see what they want and not see the things that prevents you from getting it. Because I honestly think space, in terms of where it's at, has probably never been at a more exciting time. So,
great. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you. Really good.